Welcome back, and well, we have John O'Connor. I always enjoy sitting down with John. He's a frontline warrior in so many ways, but his background and his experience, he has a lot to share with us. He's formerly a federal prosecutor, experienced trial lawyer, author of several books, Postgate and How the Washington Post Betrayed Deep Throat and Covered Up Watergate, which began today's, well, journalistic advocacy. He also has a second book to that, and that is The Mysteries of Watergate. Both can be found at postgatebook.com. John has also served as an assistant U.S. attorney in Northern California, representing the United States in both criminal and civil cases, so well experienced. Brother John, good to see you always. Thanks for your time. How are you, bud?
With you, Perry.
Well, what's your take on what's going on in L.A.?
It's necessary. It's unfortunate, but I think you probably could have predicted it. If you're really going to enforce the laws, people aren't going to like it. And it's the way our society is. If there's something you don't like, you protest, and generally the authorities are meek and they go away. And now look at the George Floyd riots. Basically, hundreds of cities just got trashed, and so many small business people ruined, lost their livelihoods. But no one really stepped in firmly. So when that happens, there's more and more feeling of license out there in society, and I think this is probably necessary. You hate to see this kind of stuff, but I think Trump's doing it exactly the right way. You have to, at some point, give people the fear of being jailed or themselves being deported if they're in fact illegal. So at the same time, this is in the guise of protesting Trump's actions. You notice there's an awful lot of Palestinian and Gaza references there. Mm-hmm. So some of this is all of a piece, I would say.
So, John, clarify something for me. The original crime of being illegally entering the United States gets preempted by something called due process.
Right.
And I'm wondering, is that fair? Is due process can eclipse the original crime of being here illegally?
Well, that's an issue, and here's the way I answer it. I think there's not been enough judicial study of this, and I don't want to say improvisation, but adjustment. Everything about the law should be proportional. Now, here's the quandary, Perry. If you cross the border, if you're an illegal immigrant, you cross the border down by Brownsville, and they catch you, and sometime within 14 days, they just pitch you back. They take you across the river and dump you off, and that's it. You're gone. There's no due process, nothing. Everybody agrees that that's just fine and dandy. But somehow, magically, after you've been here 14 days, and some of it after you've been apprehended, red-handed, so to speak, but they're letting you stay in, and Biden's letting you stay in, and then you're going to go to some tribunal later on. Now you decide, well, you know something, let's toss these people back to where they came from. They're here illegally. Now the courts say you get due process. And here's my take on it. Due process, we all have under the Fifth Amendment the right to due process for any taking of our liberty or property. But you have to have an interest in liberty or property for it to be taken. Now, if you're here illegally, what interest in liberty or property do you have?
Yeah.
Well, what the courts have said, a lot of the courts have said, well, you've been here so long, you've got a job now, you've got a girlfriend here. Gee, boy, you've got stuff. We're going to take sending you away would take away that property of yours and maybe your liberty if we're going to put you in jail. So, gee, you get due process. I think due process should be proportional to the liberty or property interest you legitimately have. If you are here illegally, what is due you should be very slight. So I think merely, perhaps a 30-second questionnaire and, you know, as to any particular confirming that they don't have a green card, that they don't have any kind of promise from the government that they're going to stay here, in which case maybe you do need a fuller due process hearing. You haven't been admitted on a student visa, so forth and so on. That should be your due process. And if the answer to that is no, I don't have any of that, I think that's it. That should be enough to say you've got to go.
Okay,
So, but that's not the way the courts have been handling it, though.
so is this a stretching of precedents?
No, what it is, it's applying something that is really not really applicable. It's just a lack of judicial imagination, I would say, or judicial discretion to say no. Taking Perry's house from him is not the same thing as sending an illegal across the border
Yeah.
or sending Perry to jail. You need due process before you send Perry to jail, a legitimate citizen of the United States. That is different in terms of the liberty or property interest you might have versus that of someone that comes across the border. So all the panoply of rights you might have in those situations should not be the same as for someone who is clearly over here illegally and has no showing of some sort of liberty or property interest. That's number one. Number two, I'm not sure that if there's that due process hearing can't be scheduled sometime in the future. And meanwhile, you've got to go back to wherever you came from, whether it's Mexico or wherever. And if you've got a gripe after that, we'll have a hearing for you. But meanwhile, you're gone.
Yeah.
I think the judiciary is very proud of the way it developed its own judge-made law over the years. For instance, the Miranda warnings. So you have the right to remain silent and all that. That's not in the Constitution. That's judge-made as a way to enforce different rights that they discern in the Constitution. And I'm not against the Miranda warnings. I think that it's a great judicial invention. But if the judiciary can invent things like that, and when I say invent, I mean it in a good way, develop them, why can't we develop uh, more appropriate due process for people that are here illegally? And that's my problem. Everything is straitjacketed. You get the same due process that Perry gets when his house is whatever. You've got to have a hearing. You've got to, and so forth and so on. Well, if everybody gets a hearing and there are millions of people that Biden let in, I mean, we can't do that. It's you've put down on a piece of paper how much it's going to cost you if you have a full-fledged hearing for everybody, and so forth. It's unsustainable. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I get that. All right. So one other question before I move on, and that is, when these riots broke out in L.A. and the president is trying to send in the National Guards, what's the conflict of the feds going into a sanctuary city?
First of all, I think a sanctuary city should mean nothing. If a sanctuary city means that the city is going to take action to prevent the apprehension of someone, it's one thing to say you're a sanctuary city and say, okay, it's our policy. We're not going to do anything. We're going to put our hands down. We're not going to go out of our way to take affirmative action to get rid of illegals. That may be a legitimate sanctuary city type of procedure. But on the other hand, if being a sanctuary city means you are going to take affirmative steps to prevent the federal government from enforcing federal law within your venue, your jurisdiction, to me, that is obstruction of justice. You should not be able to stop that. Now, in terms of bringing in the National Guard, I think the president has authority to bring in the National Guard, usually as what they call a comity, sort of a respect for the other for lower levels of government, for state and local governments. Oftentimes, you ask the governor whether he wants the National Guard in there, but you don't have to do what he tells you. In this case, Trump's within his rights to come into a sanctuary city with the National Guard to restore order on something like this because federal interests are at stake. That's number one. And number two, if the city gets in the way of that, everyone who does is obstructing justice. You cannot do that. They're different. I mean, this has been true at common law, for centuries. You cannot stop the apprehension of a criminal. They used to call it misprisioning a felon, but that's another way of saying you're obstructing justice. So that's what's going on here. And I'll tell you this: it wouldn't be a bad idea uh, in a very blatant case of interference with either the Army or the arresting or ICE. I would say people should go to jail or at least be charged criminally with obstruction. We got to stop this. We got to be able to enforce our laws. If we don't have laws, we don't have a society.
What about contributing to obstruction, such as the city council woman that came out and encouraged people to escalate their their counterpart to the ICE? You had the mayor basically doing this, and then the governor basically writing this off as nothing more than a celebration after a sports victory.
If the city council person can be deemed to have said, I want you to interfere with this, she is aiding and abetting obstruction of justice. That is obstruction of justice. It's not free speech. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. You cannot issue words which have meaning that have meaning as calls to action. It's not free speech to plan a bank robbery, even though all you're doing is talking. Um, and if you encourage people to obstruct ICE, you are committing a crime. And I think that should be prosecuted. And again, maybe you don't go to jail for a long time and so forth and so on, but I think something has to be done in that
Yeah.
regard and make that person a convicted felon. I mean, that's a felony. I mean, I used to prosecute these cases involving, terror groups, these revolutionary groups. If anybody helped such a revolutionary group escape detention by the government, we prosecuted them. We prosecuted them, and and that should be the case now.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's so interesting because she clearly said she encouraged them to go out and escalate the resistance, and I'm going, wow, she contributing here. All right, let me take a quick break. I got some other questions for you. Always an honor to have with John O'Connor. Check out his website where you can check out the books, postgatebook.com, where you can check out the book and then the sequel, The Mysteries of Watergate. All, believe it or not, very applicable to today's culture. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. Always honored to have John O'Connor with us. And John is just always gives us time, and we value it greatly. Check out his website where you can check out his books, postgatebook.com, where you can check out Postgate, the book itself, and then the sequel to it, The Mysteries of Watergate. And they're terrific reads. John, what's your 30,000-foot view when the big, beautiful bill became the big, beautiful battle between the billionaires?
Well, you can't make this up, Perry. You really can't. And of course, uh, unfortunately, sometimes President Trump goes farther or further than he needs to on some of these things. He always has a kernel of good sense, but sometimes he is extreme in enforcing that good sense. When you extremely enforce his policy at the borders, that's excellent. You can't, there should be no limit on that. But in this case, uh, Musk's buddy, and I forget his name, who was appointed head of NASA, it comes out that he had contributed to Democratic politicians. And then aides to Trump or Trump whisperers said, "Oh, this is wrong. You don't want a person like this in your administration." This is what started it all. So he withdrew this guy's nomination to be head of NASA. I don't think that was wise because nobody cares what a disgruntled NASA official says if the guy ever comes out to be an anti-Trumpy, which is what Trump was fearing. This isn't the same thing as having a Quisling in your Department of Justice or something like that. Those are Secretary of State. This is a really, really kind of political place, and what kind of controversy comes out of NASA that is political. I think he should have kept him in there. But anyway, that was the last straw for Musk. The reason I say that is because he's already taken away Musk's goodies on the EV mandates and the credits and all that, which I applaud. I mean, all that stuff was silly, but I think he should have gone out of his way to try to palliate Musk. But anyway, right now that they're basically acting like juveniles in my view, and Trump should not talk about withdrawing contracts from him. I think it cost Musk about 15% of the value of his Tesla stock when Trump started talking about that. So, and of course Musk was silly to fight back against Trump. The whole thing is now this big beautiful bill. I think any regular conservative should have trouble with the fact that there's a whole lot of spending and apparently a lot of pork in this bill. And but it is what it is. And I would rather have this bill than not have it. And if this is the only thing that can get by, that's the way this thing goes. And if you want to like laws or sausage, don't look at them being made.
I have not read the bill. I've read bits and pieces of it, and I understand the controversy in it. But it does come back to the subject of everybody wants to cut the size of government. And the old question is, how do you eat an elephant? Well, one bite at a time. Isn't this like the first bite of an elephant?
Sure. And we have such intractable problems, Perry. And of course, some of them we can't do much about. We need a military. Biden saw to it that there's inflation, which unfortunately raises our costs of funds on our borrowings from $300 billion a year in Trump's last year to around $1.2 trillion a year just in interest payments on our bonds. Now let's think about that. That's huge. But what do you do about that? The price of money is not going to go down anytime soon. So there we are. And now Moody's has downgraded us, which is another problem because of our debt. And so it's a vicious spiral. Our debt is now more than our GDP. So where do you cut? Exactly where it is now. I mean, the real place to cut, of course, is Medicaid, Medicare. This is really the vice of Obamacare, where everybody, come on, everybody get on the bus. This is the Medicaid bus. Doesn't matter who you are, we'll give you free care. Well, that's breaking our country. Unfortunately, Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney, who probably had the best fix for the whole thing, were not elected. So that's another one. I don't see a way out of it, frankly. I think
Is the president banking on his other economic policies and tariff actions and all that to offset the rising debt? Is he banking on that? It hasn't materialized, but is he banking on it materializing to be the offset of the criticism?
I don't know if it's going to be the tariffs, but I will say this. One of the things we can do is we can earn our way out of the problem with prosperity. I mean, Reagan proved that. Reagan cut taxes and everybody said, oh no, we're doomed. We're doomed. And a lot of economists like Laffer said, wait a second, if you've cut taxes, you're going to increase profits, and you're going to increase tax receipts, even though you've got a lower rate. And we're going to earn our way out of this problem. And by gosh, that's what happened. It happened in the latter Reagan years into Bush. There was a little blip on the screen, but by the time everything gets to Bill Clinton, voila, Clinton has a balanced budget. And the Democrats say, oh, Clinton balanced the budget. Well, he didn't. When you cut the taxes today, it takes 18 months before those tax cuts are realized in profit, because it's like an investment. You're going to invest those cuts in business, and then hopefully profits will come from them. That's going to be 18 months, 2 years. So I hope that some of these tax cuts and so forth, that there's a wave of prosperity, and the deficit is not what it's projected to be. But I fear.
Yeah, we are. I think we're all got our head on tilt. Just back to only a couple of minutes left. What's your 30,000-foot view of the Supreme Court these days? They seem to be interesting. They're either radical or they got their head screwed on. What's your take?
Well, the problem is you've got a lot of bright conservative people, but they're very, unfortunately for Trump, they're very good lawyers. I got to say, I think Amy Coney Barrett, I mean, she's not one to mess around with. She's a stickler. And I think you're going to find more stickling type of opinions from her. And Kavanaugh and Gorsuch are very bright people. So I think you're really getting a very non-political court, which is not necessarily good for Trump. I mean, these are not people who say, "Oh, Trump appointed me, I'm going to go their way." They're, they might give him a break on the edges here, but they're actually, it's the way courts should be. I hate to say that because there are people here who are going to say, "Oh no, the Supreme Courts might stop some of Trump's initiatives," but that doesn't bother me. It's a pretty good court.
Okay. And do you think the Supreme Court will step into some of this overreaching of the lower courts, or are they going to stay out of it and let Congress do it?
I think they will. I think they're going to lay down. One of the things the Supreme Court can do is it can teach and give overarching principles to the lower courts. And one of these principles that they're going to, inculcate, I think, is don't give a nationwide injunction unless it meets certain criteria. I know Barrett is much more sanguine about nationwide injunctions than others are, but there are certain types of conduct that if the conduct is bad, it's okay to enjoin it, and it has nationwide effect. There are many other types of things in which they're really pre-deciding millions of cases and not letting the disputes as to interpretation bubble up. The way this is supposed to work, district courts rule in their own little district.
Right.
It goes up to their particular court of appeals.
Right.
If the two circuit courts have a dispute, then it goes up to the Supreme Court. But the problem with this nationwide injunction is you don't get that chance for democracy to work where you have two circuit courts having different views of the thing. So that's the problem. And I hope the Supreme Court does its teaching of the lower courts as to how to restrict these things.
That's good advice. Thank you, John, for your time. We value it greatly. Let me say to our viewers and listeners, check out his website, postgatebook.com. There's a picture of the landing page, and get a copy of each book. Thank you, John. We value your experience and knowledge. You're the man.
Great to talk to you, Perry.
Good to see you, pal.